So what I want to do here on the demo system, because the next couple of things in the slide just really talk about database concepts, so it's probably one of those items that's better left demonstrated than just talked about and then demonstrated. Let's just jump right into the meat and potatoes of it. So what I want to do here is initially log into MariaDB, to our MySQL database, and go through the basics of creating tables, creating records, those sorts of things. And then I'm going to attempt to download a database that has a lot more information in it, a lot more records in it, and kind of use that as a, let's call it a 2.0 demonstration of database skills. So you saw that up here on this screen that I was able to log in successfully. MySQL user root, prompted for the password, log in as the root user. First thing that we have to do is create a database. So we'll go create database, and let's just call it bookstore DB. Bookstores are always used for examples in databases. We'll just kind of stick with that theme. All SQL statements have to end with a semicolon. It's essentially the equivalent of a period. Without the semicolon, MySQL is going to assume, oh, you've got more stuff to type in here. So make sure you end each one appropriately. Now that we have the database created, we have to create a table within it, because the organizational structure of a database is the database itself, the tables that can be used to store different pieces of information, and then the individual records within those tables. So the tables have to be created next. Now we want to make sure we are in the correct database, because you'll notice the prompt says none. I'm not currently in any database whatsoever. So let's use that database we just created. Use bookstore DB. Let's go ahead and create a table. Create table, and let's call it authors table. And you'll notice that the first thing it says is, well, you can't just create an empty table. The table has to contain certain criteria, certain characteristics, because each record that we add to that table is going to have a primary key, a unique identifier for each and every record that we add to it. So let's think of some things that we want to add to an authors table. So if we go authors table, and let's just do this so we've got some little bit easier viewing here. We'll create a table called authors table. The first column will be called author ID. This particular column will be of a integer, not null, auto increment. So this very first field is going to be our primary key. And it's going to start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But that'll be used to indicate the individual records within this author table. So the column will be called author ID. It will be of the integer variety. It cannot be empty, not null, and it'll automatically increment as we go through and add records to it. Auto increment. Let's give the next column the field name of author name. And this will be a variable character that we are going to limit to a maximum of 100 characters. Now, even though the first column is going to be author ID, we need to tell MariaDB that for that particular table, that column is going to be the primary key. Primary key will be author ID. Close parentheses, semicolon, query OK, 0 rows affected because the rows are the individual records, but now the table exists. Now let's go ahead and create another table for the books. Create table, books, and let's just use the same formatting here we just did books table. Same thing, we need to specify the column information. So for books, let's go book ID, integer, not null, auto increment. Now, I know some people will make the argument, why don't you use the ISBN number as the book ID? The problem that you'd run into is when you have multiple copies of the same book. And then, of course, the ISBN, we can get into a whole database discussion here, but let's just kind of keep it simple. We just need the basics for MariaDB. So we'll create it. Book ID will be our primary key. Can't be empty, auto increment. Let's say book name is the next field. Similar to author, this will be a variable character, limited to 100 characters. We want to make sure that this is not null. We probably should have done that for the author name, but just to show you guys different commands here. Not null. Author ID. Hey, so we're going to reference the author ID information within this table. That's the beauty of a relational database. Author ID will be the same thing, not null. We're not going to auto increment because we're going to reference it from the authors table. Author ID, what else could we throw in there? Book price, decimal, 62 to limit the number of characters, not null. Let's go book last updated. We'll use a timestamp. Let's go book is available, meaning it's either checked out or it's available to check out. That'll be a Boolean, true or false. And then primary key will be book ID, but we're using a foreign key, which is simply the primary key located in another table. For cross-reference purposes, foreign key will be author ID referencing, the appropriate command is references, the author's table specific, and let me spell that correctly because I have it here lowercase, author's table, and then the author ID field from that table. Close parentheses, semicolon. Created successfully. So far, so good. We've created two tables. They're going to cross-reference each other. But now we need to go through the basics of selecting, inserting, and updating, as well as deleting rows of information. So rows are ultimately records. They're going to be an author. They're going to be a book. Rows are records. Columns store the characteristics of those rows. So for customers, for example, we would have first name, last name, address. Well, in this case, we've got book name, author name, last updated, price, those sorts of things. So let's go ahead and say for the authors table, let's go and insert an author. Insert into authors table, lowercase it, authors table. Let's go author name, values. We're going to add a couple of authors with a single command. Let's go Agatha Christie. Let's go, comma, Stephen King. And we'll do one more here. We'll go John Clancy. And that should be enough for now. Close quote, close parentheses. And as always, semicolon. Query OK. 3 records, 3 rows affected because it created 3 brand new entries for us. No warnings, no errors. Let's go ahead and see those entries. So to do this, select all from authors table. Select all from authors table. My apologies. From. And we can see a couple of things went into effect. The author ID was automatically incremented. It's not null. It took the first value and assigned that to Agatha Christie. It incremented to 2 for Stephen King, incremented to 3 for John Clancy. Now that we have the author information, we should be able to query it. So from it, we can say select all from author's table where author name equals Agatha Christie. And even though we already know it's in there, this just gives you a way to kind of filter that information, to run a query. Technically, the first query we ran was to say, show me all of the entries from that table. The next query said, show me just matches for Agatha Christie. Kind of similar to a grep statement, regular expression, those sorts of things. Now we want to insert some data into the books table. So insert into books table. Let's go. We want to specify the order here. So book name, because the book ID is going to automatically be incremented. Let's go author ID, book price, book is available. Close this. We'll go values, and we'll just use some books here. What are some books from? We'll go, and then there were none. The book value, or I'm sorry, the author ID will be Agatha Christie. The price, let's just say $14.95. And then is available. One is the equivalent of true, meaning the book is available. Then we'll say, let's plug in another couple of entries in here. The man in the brown suit, Agatha Christie, $23.99, is available. Close that. Let's do a couple for Stephen King. We'll go The Stand. Author ID is 2, $35.99, is available, yes. We'll do one more for Stephen King. Let's go The Green Mile. 2. We'll say $23.99. And is available, yes. And for Tom Clancy, we'll just throw 1 in there in the essence of time. Jack Ryan, the prequel. I don't think that's a book, but we get the idea there. We'll go, this is author ID 3. Price would be $24.99 and is available, yes. Go ahead and close this out. 5 rows affected, that makes sense. We added 2 for Agatha Christie, 2 for Stephen King, and 1 for John Clancy. Now that we have some data in there to work with, we can run queries on it. Select all from books table. We can see the entries in there. The author ID was extracted from the author's table. So now we can cross-reference the 2 pieces of information. But just a couple more queries here. Let's say we wanted to, let's update an entry. That's something else that we need to do. So an existing entry, let's say we want to update. We have to specify the table we're updating, in this case, books table. Let's set the price, set book price. We're having a sale on Stephen King books. So let's say set the book price to $14.99, where book ID, or actually we could say, since we're doing it for Stephen King, author ID equals 2. Go ahead and view those entries there, and we can see that both of the Stephen King books are now on sale. Similar to what we've done before, we can say select all from books table where book ID equals, how many books do we have in there? 5. Let's say book ID equals 4. And that'll just give us the Green Mile book. based upon that information. So it's always a good idea when you're running queries to run a general select statement, just so that you know what the data is. You can issue the describe command as well to kind of tell you what the fields are, how large the table is, those sorts of things. There are a couple of different commands that you can run there. Let's go ahead and run a couple of more on this basic database. And for the record, guys, just keep an eye on the clock here. The stuff for session 8 was just an all-encompassing security discussion. So we were going to run through rich rules. We were going to run through firewall configurations, SE Linux settings. Those are things that we've actually been doing throughout. So we'll kind of use that extra time to show you guys some extra stuff that I wanted to throw in here. So we'll do a couple more queries here on SQL, and then we'll get into an advanced database and then run through those additional items that I've got on the to-do list for today. So let's delete an entry. Let's go delete from books table where book ID equals 4. So let's get rid of the green mile. When we run that query, it no longer exists, and it makes sense because we just deleted it. Now, to join two pieces of information or multiple pieces of information from two different tables, we would use the concatenate command, the concat statement. So let's say we wanted to return two pieces of information or a couple of different pieces of information from the two tables. Let's say we're going to select concat from books table, and anytime you're referencing a table, books table dot followed by the name of the field, book name, and the second part of this from the authors table dot author name and we're going to join these two pieces of information. Make sure I'm still in my system here. As description. And we need to pull books table dot book price. And we'll say from authors table join books table on authors table dot author ID equals books table dot author ID. And let's see if we were able to do this successfully. I'm gonna double check it here, but let's just run it and see what happens. So what we did here was to pull two pieces of information. So to join two or more fields from two different tables, we need to have a reference point between those two tables. And in our case, the reference point is the author ID. That author ID comes from the authors table. It's also referenced in the books table. So it gives us the ability to cross-reference those items. Now, something that we want to consider doing from a basic database management perspective, creating user accounts, because I'm logged into the database as the root user. The root user for MariaDB has access to all other databases, full-blown privileges. They are essentially root for all things databases. Probably a better idea to create a user for this database. So we can do that and say create user, and we're already in our database. Make sure you're in the correct database before you create the user. We'll say create user, and let's call it bookstore DB admin at localhost identified by, and then we have to plug in our password. So let's just say we'll use our standard password of $@ $, $W0RD, close quote, semicolon. That'll create the user account. That'll assign the password to that user. Now we have to assign the privileges to that user. Even though we created it within the database, we still have to assign the privileges. So we want to make this the DB admin, but only for the bookstore database. So we're going to say grant all privileges on bookstore DB and everything in it to bookstore DB admin at localhost. In order for those privileges to go into effect, you have to flush them. Flush privileges. And we are good to go.